Eyewitness News correspondent Doug Grindle has been to Iraq and Afghanistan several times, reporting from many corners of the war zone over time, and it's given him a rare perspective on how Rhode Islanders face and what they face each and every day and how that has changed. Joining me to debrief our colleague, Eyewitness News analyst Arlene Violet, the heart and soul of Rhode Island, and investigative reporter extraordinaire Sean Daly. Thanks for being with us, Sean. And thank you, Doug.
Welcome.
Wow. So you've gone over there in 4 times a year for the last several years. Tell us briefly what made this most recent experience different from previous ones.
Well, unlike in previous years, when I got there this time, I've been there for several months in the summer into the fall, and this time, unusually, there's actually large areas of the country which you don't really feel all that threatened driving around. It used to be that some sections of the country were pretty good, some were pretty bad, and some were downright terrible. And the terrible bits were obviously around Baghdad. And it used to be down south was reasonably good, but really most of the rest of the country didn't give you that sort of warm, fuzzy feeling. Now, having been back this time, unusually, western Iraq, which used to be terrible, actually felt pretty good to be driving around. Parts of the countryside just west of Baghdad, which used to be terrible, now actually you feel pretty good about being there. Some of these areas, attacks are down in the local sense 95%, and quite frankly, driving around in a Humvee with soldiers, knowing that you have much less chance of being shot at, really makes a big difference.
All right, we're eager to ask you a lot of questions. This week on Eyewitness News, you've given us a rare glimpse at how Rhode Islanders are experiencing life on the front lines there, and we'd like to share one of the stories. This is with, I believe, the 169th. These are guardsmen deployed in which province? No,
they're at an Anbar, which used to be a terrible place, and in actual fact is now changed a lot.
All right, let's take a look at the first of your reports from this week.
Soldiers of the 169th Military Police Company walk the streets of a town called Akashed in western Iraq. They're heavily armed, but this area sees little insurgent activity.
It's very quiet, but at the same time, you never know. One day it could be quiet, the next day you never know. Insurgents can take over.
What strikes soldiers most about this area is not the insurgent threat, but the poverty. The people of western Iraq have very little.
The people just live in very poverty. The worst conditions you can imagine, the most unsanitary conditions.
The soldiers stop and hand out candy to kids who cluster around. This is a well-established routine for soldiers and kids alike.
Well, all the kids come up here and they sort of expect a little something, treats. They always ask for soccer balls. So I try to write home to my wife and tell her to send deflated soccer balls or school supplies.
Many soldiers volunteered specially to be here. For others, their number just came up. The soldiers say that now that they're here, it's a positive experience.
It's a tough job, but I love it. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here. It makes me feel good about myself and the country, We're helping another country out that needs a little help, and hopefully we can rebuild them.
So the thing that strikes me the most is that you discovered from many of these Rhode Island soldiers that they volunteered to go back a second time, in some cases a third time. Why?
I think there's a unit camaraderie which can't be discounted. In many respects, one would think, well, perhaps they're going over to save the country, perhaps they have this overarching ideal that America needs to get the job done, and I think that to a certain extent that is true. Otherwise, you really wouldn't put your life on the line for something which you don't believe in. At the same time, for most of these people, I think, who went back, who decided to go back again, essentially they said, well, my pals are going, this is part of the same unit, and I'm not going to sit back and have them go and me not. It just wouldn't make any sense. So I think it's a unit camaraderie thing generally.
The December Atlantic Monthly has an extensive article that is reflecting exactly your comments, that things are calming down over there. So in the final analysis, is George W. Bush's surge working?
Well, if you look at this, there are really 2 explanations for why things have calmed down. The one thing is that, well, perhaps we pushed in an extra 30,000 soldiers, and all of a sudden that's created a completely different situation. I think to a certain extent that is the case. But if you look at it another way, in actual fact, the reason most of the attacks are down in most of these areas where they have dropped so dramatically is essentially because the Sunnis, the people who used to be fighting the government, have now decided they're sick of it. And the reason they decided they're sick of it is because they got sick of al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda actually ran many of these areas as the most vocal, the most extreme, the most oppressive, the loudest voice in the village hall, so to speak. They really influenced a lot of the area. And frankly, al-Qaeda is not a pleasant organization to live under. I mean, they killed a lot of popular sheikhs. They used to take many of their al-Qaeda cadre, used to take some of the sheikhs' daughters and have forced marriages. They'd cut people's hands off. Iraqis are reasonable people, despite what we might think in the news, and they did not like the rule of law under al-Qaeda.
That thesis is also echoed in the Atlantic Monthly, that the big tactical error al-Qaeda made was killing fellow Muslims, because under anybody's theory of the Quran, you're not supposed to do that. But even under that second theory, in effect, it is the credit of the American soldiers and Bush's position, isn't it? Because at least they'd have to give security there for such an uprising.
Well, I think you can look at it in this way, and I would look at it in this way, in that you might be a Sunni sheikh, you might hate al-Qaeda, but unless you've got an alternative to turn to, then what are you going to do? So what I think the efforts of the soldiers and the Bush administration have done is set up a credible alternative for these people who can say, well, we believe America will leave. We believe that the Iraqi government will not oppress us. The legitimate, elected Iraqi government will not oppress us. It's given them someone to go to instead of al-Qaeda.
But will, in the end, the Iraqi government be able to unite the country, or will Tom Friedman turn out to be right, who's arguing that in the end it will be the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Shias all living separately within this one country called Iraq?
I think it's difficult for people back here in the States to really, get a sense as to what it's like in most of the villages in Iraq. In the countryside, you might have Shia, you might have Sunni. You might have people living together for years, decades at a time. And, over here, we see the people at the top. We see Maliki. We see the people in the Shia blocks, in the Sunni blocks, all fighting together in the parliament. Well, they don't have a huge parliamentary tradition. They don't know really how it's done. But ultimately, I think that many of the impetus for keeping the country together, for living together, will essentially come from the countryside, from the people who have over years and decades lived together. They have no alternative. You're not going to kick out people from your own village.
A lot of what you hear from returning soldiers, that they feel best about doing something that can substantially improve the quality of life for Iraqis, infrastructure improvements. Were you able to measure much progress in that regard? Since there's less violence, have they been able to make inroads in improving the infrastructure?
Well, I think what's happened over the years, obviously, is the problem always was, you talk to contractors, you talk to soldiers, well, we're going to put this in, and either it gets blown up, or it's a reasonably small project, and it makes some difference, but not as much as they would like. I think there is now the sense in many of the areas, such as Anbar, where they had problems with infrastructure, that essentially, well, we put stuff in, and it's not working, and now they're getting a sense that, hey, the security situation is such that when we do put money in, it will actually come to something. But I mean, on the second side of that, the really important thing on that isn't so much the infrastructure, which frankly, for many of the areas, especially the urban areas, is really lousy still, is the fact that the local government can now actually get the job done. And without the local government actually taking the money and making sure that these things go forward, very, very little relatively happens.
So you're saying that is an improvement, that local government is becoming more effective?
It used to be in western Iraq that the local government was essentially useless. I mean, if you had someone
when you say used to be, how long ago?
Say a year ago. And the problem out there was that if you had someone in charge, you essentially either got killed or you simply were you had other things on your mind. There was essentially no running government in many of these places. I mean, if you look at a place like Ramadi, yes, they had a running government, but at the same time, it's a battle zone. I mean, there's only so much you can do. And out west, in some of these areas, such as where the soldiers from Rhode Island are, I mean, they say, quite frankly, we just had a mayor 3 weeks ago come in, and until then, this town had no government. And so really now they say, well, 3 weeks on, now we've got a mayor that might actually stamp out corruption, might actually get infrastructure working, might actually work with the government in Ramadi, which is the provincial government, the Iraqi government, and bring money in, and all of a sudden they say, maybe we can clean up the trash.
Sounds like a little bit of progress.
It is.
All right, we're going to continue our conversation and another close look at what Rhode Islanders are doing in Iraq when we return. Rhode Islanders, after Thanksgiving, are expected to be deployed to Afghanistan to train Afghani soldiers. And there is this kind of conflicting opinion about what's going on in Iraq. Although 2007 will go down as the highest number of American soldiers who will have died in combat, the numbers have really decreased markedly in the last several months. So there is this sense, as I forget which general said it, General Cody told the Associated Press on Monday, I think we've turned the corner. The enemy has patience. We also need to continue to have patience. There is this notion of, well, the Marines have kind of won. They've turned the corner. They've effectively changed things. Or is it just that the Sunnis have said, for now, we're going to be against al-Qaeda until the Americans finally leave, and then we'll go and bash each other over the head. Well, with this sense of victory or accomplishment, the Marines now want to go to Afghanistan and apply the same tactics there. Good idea, bad idea?
Well, when you look at this, I mean, if you talk to a Marine out in western Iraq and Anbar, they say, well, the reason we won is because we go and talk to the sheikhs, is because we do development projects, is because we present a pleasant face to the people. Now, I mean, that's the Marines saying that. Now, if you talk to the Army, they say, well, if you want someone to kill someone, send a Marine. They don't particularly do development projects all that well. They do reasonably well coordinate with the sheikhs, but really, I mean, it's not a warm, fuzzy feeling. And the Army says, well, we do warm, fuzzy. Therefore, that's what it's all about. If you talk to the people, the Sunnis that used to fight the government, they say, well, we got sick of al-Qaeda, and we, frankly, the government is a better choice than hanging out with al-Qaeda, than supporting al-Qaeda, and frankly, the Marines had nothing to do with it, And so the idea then of sending the Marines over to Afghanistan, who will then, quote unquote, win Afghanistan, is it depends on which one of those versions you believe. Personally, I don't find the Marine version compelling. I believe I would believe the Sunni sheikhs who say we just got sick of al-Qaeda before anyone else.
All right, let's take another look and listen to some Rhode Islanders on the front lines in Iraq.
Iraqi police run a drill at a station near Al-Qaim in western Iraq. They dashed to battle stations.
Let's say the police station was to be attacked by outsiders. Basically, they've been drilling and practicing to reach all the key points up on the roofs.
The Iraqis are watched closely by their advisors, soldiers of the 169th Military Police Company from Rhode Island. The Americans work and also live with the Iraqis in this station. The arrangement at first made the Rhode Islanders uneasy.
At first, it was kind of a little bit because you don't know if how good they do background checks here and stuff, but so far, so good.
Many of these Rhode Islanders are experts at their field. About a third deployed to Iraq in 2003. Now they're back. Many volunteered to come specifically to do this job.
This is my second time in Iraq, third deployment total.
I was here before in Desert Storm. I was out for a while, and I came back in actually to come here.
The volunteers say they could not bear to stay home when their friends are here.
You have to be here with them. I can't let them go, and then I'm sitting home wondering what it's like out there right now. Come back and listen to all their stories, so you got to be a part of them.
It's a difficult job. The soldiers will be gone from home for about a year, but the soldiers say it's worth it to be here.
It's worth it to me. Hopefully be better for my children and their children.
That soldier there, Berard, right at the end said it's worth it for him. My question is, it's sort of a paraphrase of the old Ronald Reagan question back in 1984. Is Iraq, in your judgment, better off than it was 4 years ago?
Not if you talk to someone in Baghdad who no longer has electricity, who no longer has security, and who no longer, and has seen a lot of their friends killed. But at the same time, you look at someone 4 years ago in Baghdad, it depends on your perspective. If you look 4 years ago in Baghdad, you were an Iraqi, you had no hope of anything other than a lousy economy forever, under a tyranny who killed people, for essentially no reason, and who essentially, it was a status quo, but it really wasn't much of a status quo. At least if the other perspective is that, now 4 years later, is that, things are getting better. There is actually a future. Iraq could be a terrific country. It could be an economy on par with Egypt. They have extremely high level of education, and all of a sudden, perhaps they'll be able to capitalize on that. And if you ask me, and from that perspective, perhaps they actually have more of a future.
All right, Eyewitness News correspondent Doug Grindle is going to join us for one more segment, and we know you're heading back in February, so we want to ask the question, with the political season upon us, what should happen next in Iraq when we return to Newsmakers? Debriefing with Doug Grindle, Eyewitness News correspondent, reporting from Iraq and Afghanistan. Since 9/11, 3,800 Rhode Islanders have served in the war zone. Many of them have come back damaged, physically, mentally. We could talk about whether or not it was worth it to have done that, but that's not what we're going to talk about now. I'd like to talk about, is it worth it to continue doing that, and what should happen? We'll use Doug as a sounding point, but Arlene, going into this political season, that is going to be one of the prime questions, Democrat, Republican, et cetera.
Every Democrat is running on yank the troops with varying degrees of deadline. I mean, obviously nobody has a crystal ball, Doug, as to whether the government will get its act together and act on behalf of the entire country, but from what you've seen, are the Democrats just plain wrong that we cannot prematurely take troops out starting in the spring and thereafter?
Well, I think you can't issue a blank check to a government that essentially doesn't work. However, what you also can't really do is yank the rug out from under a bunch of people over there risking their lives every day. And so if you look at it and you say, these funding battles, I think that's the most corrosive thing possible. These people are over there, they're trying to develop the money so they can put in infrastructure, and infrastructure essentially saves lives in Iraq. If you tell a village that you're going to give them a well, those villagers will not attack you. Therefore, but if you mess with the funding and all of a sudden you can't plan to put a well into a village, then you can't give them a well, and therefore they will more likely attack you. So, in my own view is that, when you start messing around with funding levels, is that you actually are putting lives on the line.
But you have to be there more than a few months to do that. We're talking
yes.
years.
Now,
is that the more realistic projection? If we weren't politicizing the situation, hit them with the government having to pull its act together, but we got to keep the troops there beyond months.
Right. Well, to address your question directly, I think that there's a good reason why none of the Democratic candidates say, let's get them out tomorrow. I think that's because everyone recognizes that this is not something you can disengage from in any sort of a sense of rush. I think we saw in Vietnam what happens when you do that. And the whole thing might collapse. I think, indeed, in going forward, that unless you really, it would not make sense for people to be pulled out precipitously.
Politically, though, where Steve was started with this segment, where do you think the U.S. election now will fall? On which side will benefit the Republicans or the Democrats on the question of Iraq?
If we hadn't seen what's happened over the last 3 months, if we hadn't seen the downturn in attacks, I'd say the Democrats would be walking away with Iraq as being an issue that would really put the wind in their sails. However, since we're a year away from the election, since attacks are well down, since there is, that eases the pressure on the Iraqi domestic situation over there to come to a settlement, I think that this is going to give a big boost to the Republicans. I think it has to.
The idea has been put forth by Senator Biden that accept the fact that it might be a partition state and pull to the extremes, pull to the borders of Iraq, allow them to learn how to police themselves, get out of their face, be available to support infrastructure improvements, et cetera. Is that a reasonable solution going forward?
I mean, that sounds like just a terrible idea, honestly. I mean, if what you're essentially doing is saying, by pulling to the borders, if I understand it correctly, is that seems to invite a security vacuum, honestly, in the center. And while, the question is, are you talking security or in military issues, or are you talking political issues? I mean, I'm not sure if I understand what the actual point of that would be, except to say, well, why don't we just give the insurgents a breather here in Baghdad, center of one of the, the center of the country. And, we didn't really mean, why don't you have a second shot at it?
Eyewitness News correspondent Doug Grindle, thank you for your reporting on our program. We appreciate you joining us on Newsmakers. Good luck to you going forward in February, and you can find a lot of his work on our website, WPRI.com. When we return, we're going to continue the conversation, taking a look at giving back your bonuses if you get injured in Iraq. Is that righteous? Is it moral? We'll continue that conversation when we return to Newsmakers. Stay with us.